Let's start with the smaller problems and slowly work our way up to the stuff that gives pilots actual nightmares. Number 10, a hard landing. This is the one that almost happens on every other flight, and you probably never even noticed it. A hard landing is when the plane hits the runway so fast and so heavy that the entire cabin shakes like someone just dropped a dumpster from a crane. Most of the time, the plane is completely fine and the pilot just had a rough day at the office. But every once in a while, a hard landing turns into something much worse. The landing gear can collapse, the wings can crack, and in some extreme cases, the plane can bounce so hard it actually skids off the runway entirely. So how do you survive it, you might ask? Well, the answer is brace position, and not the fake one you do for the photo. You lean as far forward as your seatbelt allows, you cross your arms on the seat in front of you, and you press your forehead against your arms. The reason for this is that during impact, your body gets thrown forward. At the same speed, the plane just decelerated. So if you are sitting upright with your head free, your head is about to meet the seat in front of you at roughly the speed of a small car crash. But if your head is already there, the impact has nowhere to send it. It is the least cool looking position on the plane, and it has saved more lives than every airbag combined. Number 9, severe turbulence. You know that moment when the seatbelt sign turns on and the captain casually says, "We are expecting some bumpy air ahead." What he actually means is that the plane is about to act like a roller coaster designed by someone who hates you. Severe turbulence can drop a plane hundreds of feet in less than a second, which is more than enough time for an unbuckled passenger to hit the ceiling and come back down as a bag of broken bones. This is exactly what happened in 1997 on a flight from Tokyo to Honolulu, where a single drop in altitude sent dozens of passengers flying out of their seats and resulted in 1 death and over 100 injuries. And here is the part most people get wrong. Turbulence almost never crashes a plane. The plane is built to bend and flex in ways that would terrify you if you actually saw it from the wing. What actually hurts you is your own body becoming a projectile inside a metal tube. So how do you survive it? You keep your seatbelt fastened the entire flight, not just when the sign is on. You keep it tight enough that you cannot easily slide your fingers under it. And if you really want to be safe, you sit toward the front of the plane, since the tail section experiences the most extreme movement during turbulence. Number 8, a single engine failure. This sounds scary, but in reality, it is one of the most over-engineered scenarios in all of aviation. Every commercial plane is designed to fly perfectly fine with one engine out, and pilots train for this scenario more than almost anything else. A bird strike, a fuel issue, or just a tired old engine giving up can cause this to happen. When it does, the cabin gets very quiet, the plane slowly tilts to one side, and the pilot calmly redirects to the nearest suitable airport. But here is the thing, just because the plane can fly on one engine does not mean the landing is going to be smooth. A single engine landing requires more runway, more speed, and a much tighter margin for error. So how do you survive it? The honest answer is that you do almost nothing. You stay seated, you keep your belt on, you listen to the crew, and you let the pilot do the most expensive job in the world. But if you happen to be sitting next to an emergency exit, this is the moment you actually start reading that little card in the seat pocket like your life depends on it, because in about 10 minutes, it might. Number 7, both engines failing. Now we are starting to get into the rare stuff. This is the kind of scenario that almost never happens, except when it does. And when it does, it becomes the front page of every newspaper in the world. The most famous case was on January 15, 2009, when U.S. Airways Flight 1549 hit a flock of geese over New York and lost both engines at the same time. The captain, a man named Sully, had about 3.5 minutes to decide whether to try to make it back to the airport or land somewhere else entirely. He chose the Hudson River. What he did next was so calm and so precise that the entire crash was later studied as a textbook example of how to glide a passenger jet onto water without breaking it in half. Every single person on board survived. Here is the part nobody tells you. When both engines die, the plane does not just fall out of the sky, it glides. A commercial jet at cruising altitude can glide for over 100 miles before it has to come down, which gives the pilot a surprising amount of time to find a landing spot. So how do you survive it? You brace, you stay calm, and you trust that someone who has trained for 10,000 hours just had the worst day of their career and is now doing the impossible. Number 6, cabin decompression. This is the one Hollywood movies have completely ruined for everyone. In the movies, the second a hole opens in the side of a plane, every single person gets sucked out like an evil vacuum was just turned on. In reality, it is much less dramatic and much more sneaky. When a plane suddenly loses cabin pressure at 30,000 feet, the air gets thin so fast that you have about 15 to 20 seconds before you pass out from lack of oxygen. That is not a lot of time. You will hear a loud bang, you will feel a sudden cold rush, and you might even see a fog form inside the cabin from the temperature drop. Then those little yellow masks will drop from the ceiling. And this is where most people make their fatal mistake. They try to help their kid first. This sounds heroic, but it is exactly the wrong move. Because if you pass out, your kid is going to follow you within seconds anyway. You put your own mask on first, you pull the elastic strap tight, you take a few deep breaths, and then you help everyone else in your row. The pilot will dive the plane down to about 10,000 feet within minutes, where the air is breathable again. And from there, it is just a long, uncomfortable flight to the nearest airport. Number 5, a fire on board. This one is genuinely terrifying because a plane is essentially a flying tube full of jet fuel, electronics, and people who really wish they had taken the train. A cabin fire can start from something as simple as a lithium battery in someone's bag overheating, or as serious as an electrical fault in the cockpit. And inside a metal tube at 30,000 feet, fire is one of the only things pilots truly fear. The smoke can fill the cabin in under 3 minutes, and once that happens, visibility drops to almost nothing. In 1998, Swiss Air Flight 111 caught fire in the cockpit ceiling, and the entire crew lost the plane in under 20 minutes, killing everyone on board. So how do you survive it? The single most important thing is to get low and stay low, because smoke rises and the breathable air is going to be near the floor. You take the small towel from your meal tray, you wet it with whatever liquid is closest to you, and you press it against your nose and mouth as a filter. And once the plane is on the ground, you do not grab your bag. You do not stop to find your phone. You count the rows to the nearest exit before takeoff, and when the moment comes, you move toward those exits with one goal in mind: out. Number 4, a hijacking. This used to be a much bigger fear than it is today, but it still happens occasionally, and the way you respond is very different from what it was 30 years ago. Before 2001, the standard advice was to comply with everything, sit still, and wait for negotiators on the ground to handle it. After 2001, that advice changed forever. Now the assumption is that a hijacker is not trying to land the plane safely somewhere. The assumption is that the plane itself is the weapon. This changes the math for every single person on board. The most famous example is United Flight 93, where a small group of passengers learned through phone calls what was happening, voted on a plan, and stormed the cockpit. They did not survive, but they prevented a much larger disaster. So how do you survive it? You stay aware of who is around you from the moment you board. If something starts happening, you stay quiet, you stay observant, and you wait for the right moment to act with as many people as possible. A hijacker armed with a small weapon cannot stop 50 motivated adults at the same time. The flight crew is trained for this exact scenario, and your job is to listen to them and follow their lead. Number 3, ditching in water. This is the scenario where the plane lands on the ocean or a lake on purpose, because there is nowhere else to go. It almost never works. Water might look soft, but at landing speeds, it behaves like concrete, and a single wing dipping in too early can flip the plane into pieces. The Sully landing on the Hudson worked because the river was flat, the plane was empty of fuel, and the pilot was a literal genius. In open ocean, with waves and wind, the survival rate drops dramatically. But it has happened, and people have lived. So how do you survive it? First, you tighten that life vest under your seat before the plane hits the water, but you do not inflate it until you are outside. This is critical, because if you inflate it inside and the cabin fills with water, the vest will pin you to the ceiling, and you will drown, looking up at an exit you cannot reach. Once outside, you swim away from the plane to avoid getting sucked under as it sinks. You inflate the vest, you find the nearest piece of floating debris or raft, and you stay together with other survivors, and you start praying that someone, somewhere, knew exactly where you were going down. Number 2, a remote wilderness crash. This is one of the rarest scenarios, but when it happens, it becomes a survival story that lasts for weeks or months instead of minutes. The most famous case was the 1972 Andes flight disaster, where a Uruguayan rugby team crashed in the mountains at 12,000 feet. They survived the crash, but they were stranded in the snow for 72 days before anyone reached them. What kept them alive was a combination of teamwork, brutal decisions, and a refusal to give up. If you ever find yourself in this scenario, the first hours are the most dangerous. You check yourself and others for injuries, you find shelter inside the wreckage, and you stay warm and dry at all costs. The plane itself, even broken, is the best shelter you have access to. You ration food and water. You do not wander off looking for help unless you have absolutely no other option, because rescue teams are looking for the plane, not for you. You signal in every way possible, with mirrors, with smoke, with bright clothing laid out in patterns on the ground. And here is the part nobody likes to hear. You make hard decisions about food. The Andy survivors did what they had to do, and decades later they still talk about it with peace, because the alternative was not living to talk about anything at all. Number 1, a mid-air breakup. This is the absolute worst-case scenario, and statistically, it is the rarest event in commercial aviation. It happens when something so catastrophic occurs that the plane physically separates into pieces while still at altitude. And here is the part that sounds completely impossible until you read about it. People have survived this. In 1972, a Yugoslav flight attendant named Vesna Vulovic fell over 33,000 feet without a parachute after her plane broke apart over Czechoslovakia. She landed in deep snow, inside a piece of the fuselage that absorbed most of the impact, and she lived to tell the story. In 1971, a 17-year-old girl named Juliane Kupsi survived a similar fall after lightning destroyed her plane over the Amazon jungle. She not only survived the fall, but then walked for 11 days through the rainforest before finding help. So how do you survive the unsurvivable? The honest truth is that almost nothing in your control will save you at this point, but the people who have lived through it shared a few common factors. They were strapped into their seats when the plane broke apart, which kept them inside a protective shell of metal. They landed in something that absorbed impact, like snow, dense jungle canopy, or water, and they were physically calm, which kept them from panicking and breathing too fast on the way down. Above all, they survived because they decided to, and that, more than any other factor on this entire list, is the one thing every plane disaster survivor has ever had in common. The next time you board a plane, take 10 seconds to count the rows to your nearest exit, fasten your seatbelt a little tighter than the last guy, and remember that almost everyone on every flight that has ever had a problem walked away from it. You are statistically safer in the air than you are driving to the airport, but knowing what to do when things go wrong is what turns passengers into survivors.